Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Man Up, Man Down. This episode, I don't think, I want to be honest, didn't quite go the direction I expected it to go. And if we had had more time, we would have gone so much deeper. But it was, I'm still stunned. So, Rick Belden, he is a poet, he's a men's coach. He he didn't disclose his age, right? But he started looking into stuff with men in the 80s.
I mean,
So,
he's a proper trailblazer, really. I feel like we've kind of,
yeah.
interviewed sort of one of the godfathers of men's personal development in a lot of ways.
Exactly. I was thinking the same. I was almost thinking he's what Freud is to psychotherapy. He is, to the men's movement and men connecting to their feelings. So when I mentioned the book, the Iron need to look it up now. Iron John book, which has been on my shelf for ages to be read, about mankind, basically. He goes like, "Oh, I know the author. I wrote the book at the same time." He's up there. An amazing episode. We touched on so many topics, so many things still buzzing in my head. So enjoy this week's episode. I think it's great. David, what's your main takeaway for this one?
Oh, you put me on the spot there.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it was, yeah, we've talked a lot about kind of the influence that parents have, but
Yeah.
yeah, no, it was interesting to kind of just dive a bit deeper into that and interesting things what he was saying about how the yeah you well that you can't change the past. I mean, that's a really simplified way of putting it, but yeah,
Yeah.
just give the episode a lesson and yeah, let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Enjoy.
Welcome to the Man Up, Man Down podcast, presented by Volker Beluda and David Pawsey. We discuss the pressures and challenges faced by men approaching middle age that we're often too embarrassed to speak about with our friends. You can find us online at www.manupdown.com. Enjoy the show and don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review.
So welcome to another episode of Man Up, Man Down. Today we're joined by Rick. Rick Belden is a respected explorer and chronicler of the psychology and inner lives of men. As a men's coach, he helps men who are feeling stuck get their lives moving again by drawing on over 35 years of experience exploring men's issues, masculine psychology, and recovery from trauma. His client list includes hundreds of men of all ages and various backgrounds in 30 states in the USA and 23 nations worldwide. Well, thanks very much for joining us, Rick. I mean, there's sort of a lot that I think we're going to be talking about, judging by the sort of short conversation we've already had. I mean, sort of on that bio, I know that you haven't included on there that you're also a poet and an author. So, I mean, well, just to start off with, well, thanks for joining us. And I mean, how did you get into, sort of working around the psychology of men?
Well, thanks for the intro, David and Volker. I'm very happy to be here with you guys. It's interesting, as I said in our short conversation before this, I was listening to your program with Kenny. Can't remember his last name. What was his last name?
Uh,
Uh,
uh, Even if you could remember it, probably wouldn't be able to to recite
okay,
it.
okay, but it doesn't matter. Like,
The
it was
Man Whisperer, Kenny the Man Whisperer.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and it was interesting for a couple of reasons. One is that, I first encountered him in this arena over 20 years ago, and it's
Wow.
interesting to me to see how some of us have hung in there because it's not that easy, uh, and uh, and to see how people's work has evolved. So it's interesting to listen to that. But the other thing you talked about, one of you actually asked him, well, how did you get into the position where you could do what you're doing? And, my short version of his answer was, I had no choice. I was such a mess that I had to learn through a lot of trial and error, and through studying with different people and so forth. How can I basically get reconnected with myself? Um, because that was the thing I didn't realize. So in my late 20s, I hit a crisis point. I had graduated from college. I have a computer science degree. I was working in that area. I wasn't happy with it. Uh, I couldn't keep a relationship going with a woman for more than a couple of weeks at a time. All my friends were getting married. There was nobody to party with anymore. I was just partying by myself, which is just gruesome. And I had a relationship with a woman I really liked that crashed really quickly, really badly. And at that point, I said, well, I think I need to be open to the idea that maybe I could find somebody who could help me understand what's going on in my life. Um, and then shortly after that, an opportunity appeared, and I went to work with a guy named John Lee here in Austin. We were talking about Robert Bly earlier. He was kind of in Robert Bly's circle, and he did men's groups and individual consulting, and that's where I started to open up, and I started to get interested and realize that there is a way out of this. There are ways to get um, get more familiar with what's going on inside me because I didn't really know. I just knew I was unhappy. Um, and so from that point forward, I was in a number of different men's groups over the years. As a result of that experience, I kind of got back into, I did a lot of journal writing. I started remembering and paying attention to my dreams. I wound up writing my first poetry book. And I became convinced that as men, we don't have to live the way that I was living. Uh, Being in that first men's group was a real eye opener because I thought, I don't even want to talk because whatever I say is going on inside me is going to sound weird to everybody else. And what I heard was everybody else saying very similar things. Uh, it was amazing to me when men actually opened up and had real conversations about what their experience was like in life and what their life was like on the inside. It's just like, wow, this is completely different than what I thought. I'm not alone. I'm not some weirdo outsider. It's like, oh, all the men in the room are trying to work through various uh, difficulties in their lives. And that was kind of the point where I decided, well, I'd like to be able to help men in the way these guys are helping me at some point. And then it took about another 35 years or something like that for me to actually get into position to do it. And that's how I wound up doing the coaching thing. But I did, as you said, I wrote 3 poetry books. I did a lot of other kinds of writing. I did all kinds of artwork. I spent a lot of time in men's groups. I spent a lot of time with different counselors and different therapists and different coaches. Um, because even at my lowest point, I always felt like I deserve better than this. Um, I do. And thank God, I've always had a really strong commitment to myself, even at the worst times. And that has helped me to keep going. But I've also had a lot of curiosity too, because I've always, ever since I was a kid, it's like, why do people act like this? What's going on here? What does this mean? Um, can't we do better than this? And so that might be a muddled answer to your question, but that's the one I have right now.
So I'm gonna let Volker get a word in a moment. I mean, with the writing and the poetry, was that something that kind of came as a result of your sort of exploration of yourself, or was that something that you'd sort of shown like an interest in from an early age or earlier age?
Yeah, great question. So, when I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to be a writer. Um, and I did my first poetry project in high school and I illustrated it myself. And it's really great for a high school kid. Um, Sometimes I look at it, it's like, wow, I can't believe I did that, at that age. Um, but I came out of a blue collar environment and also a very neglectful, traumatizing, abusive family system. And so I was like, well, I can't be a writer. I'll never be able to support myself doing that. And so I just kind of pushed it all away as having no value, no practical value. Um, and then as I moved into the men's work arena, with those experiences I described, it just started to, it sort of naturally resurfaced, and I started doing a ton of journaling. And then I started, as we talked about in the intro, uh, I had this ongoing series of dreams about Iron Man, uh, the Marvel Comics character. And back in those days, that was 87, 88, 89. That was a very uh, sort of fringe character. People really didn't know about. There's no public awareness of him. But I got real fascinated with that character when I was, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years old. And I kept having these dreams, and I was just like, God, am I just going nuts? You know? And I found a counselor to work with who specialized in dream work, and so he helped me. And then I was doing all this journaling, and got this idea. It's just like, well, these dreams take forever to write down. What if I wrote them down as poems? Uh, and that was really where that was kind of a turning point, because then I'm having all these Iron Man dreams. I just write them down as poems, and I went to a poetry workshop at the Men's Center here in Austin, and the guy that was running it was like, "Well, you're writing a book. You have all these poems. That's a book." And I said, "I am not." Like, um, but it turned out that I was, and that was this is what I do a lot of work with men when I'm coaching. Is like we, especially if we're under stressful, traumatizing situations, we tend to sort of peel off parts of ourselves as we're growing up, as we're getting to adulthood, if they don't serve any practical purpose. Or if somebody basically says, well, that's just ridiculous, or someone says, well, that's weird, or whatever. In my case, it was kind of all of that, but it was really about this just isn't practical. And then as I started to get into uh, some kind of understanding of my emotional life and my inner life as a result of working in those groups and working with that individual teacher, um, all these dreams started to come, and I didn't realize that they really meant anything. But it turned out that that was those dreams were my entry point into reconnecting with that 8-year-old who had been in there screaming for somebody to pay attention to him, because he had so much creative energy and so much expressive energy. And he had so much knowledge that I needed. And that's one of the things I tell men. It's just like, your younger selves have knowledge that you need right now. Uh, and so I don't know if I'd even still be alive if I hadn't reconnected with that part of myself and done that project, which kicked off a whole lot of other things in my life. So that was absolutely a fork in the road for me. And the other fork was nothing. Either I reconnect with that part of myself and I get him back into my life in some sort of collaborative way, or else I don't have a life.
I don't even know where to start, Rick, in terms of questions. To be honest, there's so much going on in my head. Um, I mean, the Iron Man stuff, story is fascinating. I love that. Maybe and forgive me if I'm the way I'm thinking, but when you were in these men's group in the 70s, right?
In the 80s, I'm not that old.
Or the 80s, right? Then, I mean, back then, a men's group would have been, I want to say, an outsider group, right? It would have been, and correct me, please, but it's kind of like these men are weird. They want to talk, right? They want to talk about their emotions. I mean, even these days, there's a stigma attached, but
Yes.
we have lots and lots of men's group now, and we finally opening up. But I reckon in the 80s, it would have been like, these guys are a bit odd. They talk about their feelings. So how have things changed in your eyes? I mean, you've been doing it for 35 years. You've been talking with men. You've been working with men. How has a man itself kind of evolved from, it's okay to talk. It's okay to opening up. It's okay to seek therapy. It's okay to seek help, which, I think in the 80s would have been, you know, if I say the odd one out doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And there's much like you, now I'm going in about 5 directions at once. But um, I guess the way I'll start is by saying uh, one of the things that's changed is we've had a couple of generational rollovers, right? So,
Yeah.
like, for me, I was the first generation to go to counseling or therapy or anything like that. And in my family, my family system, in the culture at large, you didn't do that. Like, you just didn't go outside the family. It's like you solve your problems in the family. Well, what if the family doesn't allow you to express anything? Well, then you're just going to have to live with it. And so that was the first hurdle I had to get over, which was like, I know the rules of the family. I know I'm not supposed to go outside. Um, in my case, this fellow John Lee, he had published an interview in a local publication here in Austin, Texas, where I live, and I read his interview and I was like, that guy's telling my story. So I was able to kind of, in addition to the fact that I was desperate, I also felt like, well, I think this could be a safe person for me to try to explore this with and maybe get some answers. And it wasn't very long because I was working with him individually, and he was saying, "Well, I'd like to get you into my men's group." And I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, like, this is hard enough, you know." But he kept at it and he kept encouraging me, and then I went into it. Um, and it was very niche at that time. It was, I mean, he had enough people, he had enough men to do it. Um, so yeah, at that time it was kind of like hacking through the jungle, frontier type operation. Um, I think jumping ahead to now, there's still a lot of stigma attached to it. I don't think there are nearly enough men's groups out there. And, in my experience with the groups I've been in, I always talk to the facilitator about like, well, how do you keep this going? They're like, well, it's a challenge, because a lot of men still feel resistant uh, to exposing themselves, so to speak, in a group of other men. Because a lot of men have had bad experiences when they were younger in groups of other men or other boys. That's where often we would get bullied, or we would be quite aware that if we weren't the target of being bullied, then we should basically at least keep quiet. Um, and so I think there's, as you said, Volker, I think there's more opportunity now in terms of men's groups. I was very fortunate. I just happened to be living somewhere where there was somebody who was kind of a pathfinder who was doing that. Um, but I also think there's still a lot of reluctance. And I think that, I don't know, man. I think therapy in the main is not built really well for a lot of men. And so if a man goes into a therapy situation and it doesn't work for him, then he's just going to be like, okay, all of this stuff is garbage. I'm certainly not going into a group, and I don't want to feel as bad in a group as I did with this person who didn't understand me. So there's still a lot of hurdles out there. Although, as you said, there's more accessibility. And to get back to where I started, the generational rules are different now than they were in 1987. It's like we've had a couple generations of kids that have grown up with parents going to therapy, or they have friends whose parents went to therapy, or uh, you know they've gone because of issues in their marriage or whatever. So I think, yeah, the landscape's more open now, but I still think it's not as densely populated as I'd like it to be in terms of men's groups, and also um, I guess the kind of outreach to men that they will actually respond to.
So how has a man changed, or has a man changed, or is it just the environment the man is in that has changed, do you reckon?
Well, I think it's both. I think that
Yeah.
in terms of, I don't think it would have been possible to do what I'm doing, what I've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years now, if I tried to start it 10 years earlier. Um, because there is, well, I'll put it this way. There's a lot of pressure on men socially to open up and to be vulnerable. And it puts a lot of men in a bind because they don't really know where to do that. If they want to do that or if they want to try, it's like, where do I do that? Um, and so I think in some ways, men are more stressed now psychologically in a different way when it comes to this topic. Because before they might have been feel like, well, I wish I could get some help, but I that's too weird. I'm not going to do that. And I think now there's another aspect, which is, well, I wish I could get some help, but I don't even know where to start. How do I find someone who works with men? How do I find a men's group? How do I know if it'll be safe? How do I know if it'll be okay? Because it's a bit, even for me, it's like all the multiple men's groups I've been in, every time I've started one, even up to the last one several years ago, first time I walk in, I'm like, man, I'm gonna shit my pants. Like, this is fucking scary.
Yeah.
You know?
Um, David, I don't know if you have a question, otherwise I just continue.
No. Well, please do. I mean, I have got questions, but
Uh,
yeah,
let me
no,
ask
this
one
this is
more,
great.
because I think the whole feeling bit, right, and connecting to your feelings, right, it's what you specialize in. So when you get someone who says, and I bet you had that many times over the years, and a man, and I probably would have been one of those 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and someone says, I don't feel anything.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have heard that sentence hundreds
Yeah,
of
I
thousands
I
of times.
said it myself in the
Yeah.
early days. And the little trick I learned actually from the first couple of guys I worked with was, and their response would be, and this is one of my responses is, well, what would you, if you knew what you were feeling, what how would you describe it?
Yeah.
And that tends to let people off the hook. It's also okay for men, especially in these early stages, to just say, I don't know, and just let that be okay. Um, Another thing you can do, which both of you are probably familiar with, is you can, you know, maybe help them focus on their body a little bit. Like, just, like, what do you notice in your body right now? Well, I don't notice anything from the head down. That was me. You know. Okay, well, let's start with what you do notice. And just try to build that connection up a little bit at a time in a way that doesn't feel like it's being forced. I think a lot of the answer, at least from my perspective and my experience, is like, you can't turn it into a performance experience for these guys.
Yeah.
They have to feel like it's okay that they don't know the answer.
David, you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking about the well, just yeah, like making that first step into a men's group. And I mean, it's interesting that you've mentioned Kenny, because I I few weeks ago I had a bit of a mental, well, yeah, I went through a low, um and I was like, right, I'm gonna, I'm not, and it's one of those things, the privilege of doing this podcast is you get to hear about all these amazing groups, but at the same time it's almost like, oh well, I'm a bit spoilt for choice. I don't know which one to go to. And
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. Yeah.
but yeah, and I mean, the thing that sort of, when Kenny mentioned it, was the fact that it's online and it's, lunchtime, so it's sort of right bang in the middle of your day. And there's, obviously I do this podcast, and I've done a lot of had counseling myself, and um yeah, so it to me it's not an alien space, but still, joining the group was still quite a big step for me.
Yes.
But as you say, at the time, I mean, and sort of talking about it now, in some ways it seems a bit silly, but basically, like, where I rent desks, I was renting desk space in an office with some sort of fellow freelancers, sort of small businesses, and we had to move out. So sort of gone into a bit of a period of like isolation,
Mhm.
and and at the same time we've sent our dog off for 3 weeks of training, and I was just suddenly like really lonely. And um it would have been my dad's birthday. He died a couple of years ago. My son won like player of the year. And I was just like, I really want to tell my dad about it and I can't. And so yeah, I was like, right, I need to, I'm going a bit crazy here. Probably a frivolous way of saying it, but it's like I need some connection, I guess, is you know but it was still, it's, "Oh, shall I sign up? Shall I not?"
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, how sort of, do you encourage men? And sort of also, I think, you know, it's quite interesting that you had that person to kind of guide you, you know, in the first instance. And again, it's almost that fine line of, you know, being supportive, but also not, you know, micromanaging or, you know, almost pressuring, as you say. Comes like, come on, you've got to be vulnerable. You'll feel a lot better if you be vulnerable.
Yeah. And so I think that it is important that it certainly was for me. It's important that I think a couple things have to happen. I think you have to initially, at least, you have to get kind of desperate. Um, that's one thing that we were talking about Robert Bly earlier. I remember seeing him, and one of the things he said that day was like, how he put it, I'm going to mangle a little bit, but basically the idea was like, you're not ready to look inside until you have failed in a significant way in your life that you just can't tolerate. Uh, and that takes different forms with different people. I mean, for a lot of guys, it's the end of a marriage. You know, for a lot of guys, it's the loss of a job. For some guys, it's retirement. You wouldn't think of retirement as a failure, but like they retire and then they're just like, I don't even know what I'm about. Um, so it often takes something pretty dramatic, some kind of dynamic shift in your life. And even in what you described, David, was like, you know, that's not a big mega event in your life, but you've become sufficiently self-aware that you know when you're coming up to your edge, right? When you were younger, you probably didn't know that. Like I
No.
know.
And, you know, and it's interesting sort of what Volker said about, you know, being in his 20s and, you know, and it is, yeah. Yeah, at that point, it's just like, well, I drink, you know, or
Yes.
yeah, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. And so some of its work is about that. It's about learning about yourself, learning about what your patterns are. You know, what do you react to? How do you react? Um, and what can you do instead? Um, what can you do to soothe yourself? And some of it is also about developing emotional and psychological resilience. Um, you really, I don't know, I'll speak for myself. That I developed the kind of emotional psychological resilience that enabled me to survive a hostile environment. But that doesn't prepare me to be an adult, right? Because most of the time, realistically, as an adult, I'm not in a hostile environment. So we're talking about a different sort of aspect of emotional and psychological resilience that you need as an adult just to get through life. Uh, and that's not about just like, and I understand there are advantages to stoicism. I'm not here to argue against that, but we all have our limits. And so part of developing emotional and psychological resilience as an adult, as a man, is understanding as you do now, this is a limit. Okay. Emotional and psychological resistance is not about tormenting myself until somehow magically things get better. Uh, but you also have to be prepared. And this is something I think all boys and young men should be prepared for. You're going to be alone at some time in your life. You're going to be stressed. You're going to be in some kind of crisis and you're going to be alone. What are your internal resources to deal with that? That's something I was never taught. Um, and that's something I had, as Kenny said, I had to unscrew myself up. And that was part of it. It was like, okay, it's not just about bearing down and toughing out, you know, and just, you know, banging my knuckles until they're bloody. It's like, if you got to do it, you got to do it. You know, that's the warrior aspect. Uh, but you need more of a supervisor, a kingly sort of CEO, overseer, you know, who's running this thing, um, that can actually, as you did, kind of step back and go, okay, this is not a, you know, like run against the wall until it breaks down situation, right? That's not the kind of emotional psychological resilience I need right now.
Hello folks, it's Volker here. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. As you know, I coach executives, whether that is for leadership skills, or sales leadership skills, or working as a therapist too. There are few ways I can help you to get unstuck, improve your work-life balance, or become a better version of yourself. So you will be more productive and have more time for your family. Whatever it is, you can join my client list of people from General Electric, Pepsi, DHL, Boots, and many others. Book a free exploratory call via my website, www.obnat.us. That's OBNAT.us. Now back to the show.
Ooh, again, the warrior aspect.
Yeah.
I'd love to dive into that. However, there's something else you mentioned. I'm doing a lot of work around attachment theory at the moment, with my clients. So looking at your book themes, right? The father's wound, the mother's wound, the masculine wound. I mean that goes in the same direction, right? And it goes in the same direction. And again, correct me, please. When you say we need to learn to be by ourselves at some point, right? We need to get away from being protected by our mothers, by our fathers. We need to be the warrior, but we also need to be at peace with ourselves. Tell us more about it, because I think there's a lot in there. I don't know if we can
Well,
cover it all.
there is a lot. Now I'm going to like this again. Um, Okay. Well, this is why I like to have these conversations,
Yeah.
right? This is a rich topic, and I think there's, I think one of the dilemmas, that we have, those of us who want to help men, is like this work is not well represented out in the public. It's kind of represented in a monolithic way where either you're weak, or you're crying, or or you're confused, or it's so much richer than that. Um, so, yes. So the sort of wounding that we suffer as children, which we all do, it's like parents are not ideal. Even the most ideal parents are not ideal. And some parents are a lot worse than others. Um, but as children, as you mentioned, we have to attach to these figures. Uh, and what I found with myself, or what I find with all of my clients, is that we may think as adults that our problem is with the external figure, the father or the mother, or both. And that may be an aspect of it. It often is. But the bigger issue, the bigger challenge, is the relationship that we have created with the model of that person that we carry around internally. Um, and that's where a lot of people, that's where the opportunity is really, for a lot of this work, try to clear out these parental wounds. Is, people have the idea, it's like, well, I have to be able to sit down with my mother and tell her everything that hurt me, and have her listen and hear me and understand me. It's like, well, if you can get that done, fantastic. Uh, but in all likelihood, you're not going to be able to get that done, because that person just isn't speaking your language. They haven't done the work that you've done to have a conversation like that. And that doesn't mean that they're at fault. And if you take it as your mission to try to change them into someone who can hear you, then you're going to sink a lot more of your life into that. Um, where the opportunity lies, for the most part, is with that internalized version of your mother, that you carry around inside your head, that you carry around inside your heart, that when you have a dream about your mother, you're dreaming about that. Uh, when you're having an argument with your mother in your head about something that happened 30 years ago, it's in your head. It's with that person who doesn't exist anymore, right? That's an image or a facsimile of a person that was imprinted inside you at that time. That person doesn't exist anymore. You're not going to be able to resolve that particular issue in all likelihood with the 30-year older version of that person on the outside, if they're even still around. Um,
Yeah.
and where that really comes into play, I think, in the most powerful way um, is grief and grieving. I had to come to this point with my own mother and my father as well. I had to get to the point where I could say to myself, "Oh God, I don't want to say it." So there's still some residue in there, obviously. I'll try again. I had to get to the point where I could say to myself, "I'm never going to have that mother that I want," and really feel it, and not try to argue myself out of it, and not try to strategize my way through it, but just feel the impact of that, which I'm feeling now. So it's like, obviously, there's still some still some energy there. Um, but that's like an absolute sort of like objective standard that I think we have to meet, men or women, uh, to be able to say, I'm never going to have that father I wanted. I'm never going to have that mother I wanted. Because now you're actually talking to your younger selves who just decided, I'll do anything, I'll do everything. I'll never stop trying to get that man to love me. I'll never stop trying to get that man to approve of me. I will never stop trying to get my mother to love me and notice that I have needs and see me as an individual. It's like we need to make those promises as children because we have no other choice. It's like, you know, if things aren't going right in relationship in the family or with the parents as children, our survival is at stake, right? And if we feel like there's nothing we can do, then that's a hopeless situation and that's too much for a child. What a child can do is say, it's probably because of me, right? If I just try harder, if I just wait long enough, if I just do the right things, if I just make sure that she's taken care of, if I just make sure that I don't make him mad. Um, and you wind up being like 60 years old and you're still operating like that. And that affects how you operate out in the world with other people, in your marriage, in your job, how you treat yourself. Your relationship with yourself is the number one thing that matters the most as far as I'm concerned. And I learned that by accident. I didn't know that was the most important thing. And that's what I emphasize with all my clients now, not like reminding them every 5 minutes, but that's sort of the foundational instrumental part of the process with everything I do with clients is to help them to better understand and assess and develop and progress their relationship with themselves, because that's where so much stuff goes wrong. If you don't have a good relationship with yourself, it doesn't matter what you've done out in the world. You're going to be miserable. And that goes back to, in a lot of ways, the promises that you made and the commitments that you made as a little boy. How can I get these people to see me and get me what I need so I feel loved and safe?
Because we constantly try and seeking that, right? All our lives, we want to seek that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to get it when you're a little kid.
Yeah.
And if you don't get it when you're a little kid, you still want it, you still need it, you still seek it, as you said.
Yeah.
But you can never get it as an adult the way that you should have received it as a little kid. So you just have to come to terms with that as best you can, and then find a way to function as best you can with what you can get, what you can give yourself, and what other people can give you in a reciprocal way. And that ebbs and flows sometimes. And that goes back to what I said earlier,
Yeah.
which is like, you need to have the best, as I'll just say as a man, if we're talking about men, as a man, you need to have the best, most self-aware, intelligent, caring, loving, solid relationship with yourself that you can. Because that way, when life ebbs and flows, whether it's circumstances or people or whatever, you have something to come back to. You have an anchor point that you can trust. And I've said before, I think grief is the gateway to mature masculinity. It's like if a man is not capable of grieving his losses, not just the things that he had and lost, but the things that he wanted and never had. Um, if he can't grieve those circumstances, then he'll stay stuck in those unfelt, unfinished experiences, and he will never be able to mature completely.
Would that be coping or would that be healing then? Do you think a lot of men just cope in life rather than heal?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's what we're trained to do.
Yeah.
And I
They-
think you're right about that. I think a lot of men do cope. It is healing, but it's also the other thing I learned is like, I don't know, probably the first 20 years of my experience in doing this kind of stuff for myself and being part of it with other people is there's all this emphasis on healing, healing, healing. And I got to a certain point and said, so, well, why am I still having problems? Like, how much more healing do I need to do? And then I started to realize it's two things. It's healing, yes, but it's also development, right? You have to, there's a bunch of developmental gateways that you don't get to cross through growing up that you're supposed to on your way to adulthood that in these kind of situations where you have parents who are disconnected or they're dysfunctional or abusive or the family system is all screwed up or whatever, it's like you never really finished developing out of childhood into an adult. And sometimes that's real practical things. Like I had a client one time where he's just like, well, nope, my parents never taught me about personal hygiene. I didn't know anything about it. And he's like in his late 20s. And he's like, I started to figure out, it's like, I think I'm supposed to like do these things every day. Um, so that's a real pragmatic sort of developmental deficit that it was not his fault. It was because of neglect growing up. So that's kind of a little bit easier to spot. But then there's other things that are, I guess, more nuanced or more subtle, like, if you have a disagreement with somebody, how do you address it? Well, for me, it was just like, well, just get away from it. Like, try to, settle it down. Well, don't let it boil over because then all kinds of bad things are going to happen. Um, but ideally, a child, as part of their development into adolescence and adulthood, would have somebody help them to build the skills and the understanding so that they can approach disagreements in a productive way rather than in a regressive way that causes things to just go underground and go unaddressed.
I mean, I just sort of wanted to sort of say that you make a really powerful point there. I think in two different ways, but sort of talking about the fact that, it is almost like a constant process,
Hmm.
but the fact that you got choked up still sort of talking about your relationship with your parents. And, I guess for me, it's like, oh, wow, it's not meant to be fixed almost, it's all right that it's always going to be there even after 35 years of personal development. And but also sort of seeing the way that you kind of acknowledge it, and accept it. And yeah, well, I just wanted to say that was, yeah, that was the work in action almost,
Yeah, yeah, that's
it can.
absolutely unscripted moment there. I didn't know that was coming, and that's one of the things, as you point out, it's like I've learned. It's just like I no longer have this idealistic goal that I can just wipe all this stuff out and have a clean slate. It's just like I think it's more of a process of sort of whittling things down, you know, particularly to the point where they're not interfering. But I had a session with one of my teachers a couple of days ago, and this came up, and he said, "Well, you've done all this work on mother wound, and you've done all this work on father wound." He said, "But I think the thing that you haven't really approached yet is what they created together. The dyad that they created together. Apart from how they operated and affected you as individuals, there's a third entity here, which is that mother father dyad." And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." You know, like after a couple days later, I was like, "Oh man," I started to reflect back on some really bad stuff that happened when I was 15 that they did together as a duo, as a team. And that's just sort of an explicit example of that dynamic. I think that dynamic was at work kind of under the surface all the time in ways that I didn't recognize. But that's just an example of how, speaking of developmental process, like this to me is not static. It's like now there might be some people who grew up in fairly reasonable households, and maybe they don't have a lot that they've been carrying, and maybe they can discharge that and kind of work and heal and develop their way through it, and then kind of be relatively free of it. But for somebody that grew up in a high trauma family system like I did, um, I think this is a lifetime's work. A lot, and again, because you can't go back and fix it. Um, so you're gonna have to. It's like those bonsai trees, where they like somebody basically said this limb isn't going this way, it's going over here. It's like, well, I'm one of those. You know,
Yeah.
I can't go back and straighten the limb out and make it look like a regular tree.
It's
There
interesting.
was there was another. I was doing some mindfulness earlier. See, I'm living the brand. But like sort of it was one on the car map, and sort of there was a phrase at the end that, whether you're thinking about the past or the present. Sorry, if you're thinking whether you're thinking about the past or the future, it's all in your head. The only thing is the
Yeah,
present.
yeah. It's all a creation, and it's a narrative. These are stories. It's like, that's a lot of this work too, is like understanding what is the narrative. Because, like, you know, we're brilliant as children in coming up with strategies to survive. And part of this, a big part of those strategies is the narratives that go with them, right? So you learn, if I do this, something bad happens. If I do this, they'll leave me alone. And that becomes like a codified sort of narrative in your belief system. You may not be aware of it. And that's a lot of the work that I want to do, that I do with men, is to help them become more aware of, like, what are your default baseline stories that you live with, that you don't just live with them, you live in them. As you said, David, it's just like, you're living in a story. Um, and fortunately, as adults, hopefully we have enough reasoning capability and enough maturity to be able to step back from that story and go, well, it felt true when I was 5 years old. It might have been true. Is it still true now? And is a story I told myself as a 5-year-old something I want to direct me as a 45-year-old? You shouldn't let little kids drive the car. Like, they
Yeah.
don't have, but it's the best story you could come up with at the time, because you're in this closed system. Your brain's not fully developed. You don't have any external reference points. And of course, you're going to come up with a story that doesn't make sense to an adult, but it made sense to you as a child under duress.
Well, and I guess also it's that the thing of what was a survival technique at the time, you know, isn't, which, sort of hearing, the environment you grew up in, constantly scanning for danger and constantly
Yes.
being on high alert.
Yep.
And then, yeah, you do physically and sort of mentally get used to being in that state and constantly sort of scanning for danger, don't you?
Yeah, it's called hypervigilance. And it's not just something in your mind, it's something in your nervous system, it's something in your body.
Constant flight fight response.
Yeah, and Volker, you've probably looked into this stuff. I've been learning a lot over the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years about complex trauma, or complex PTSD as it's called. And we used to think fight or flight, but there's actually two more. There's one called freeze and there's one called fawn. Um, Little kids go into freeze because they don't really have any other options. As they get older, they learn about fawning, which is basically, this animal's about to eat me. Uh, how about if I offer him this other smaller animal, and then he'll leave me alone? Or how can I, basically people pleasing?
Yeah, yeah.
That fawning is what people talk about as people pleasing. Um, and so, fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. It's like anybody who grew up in what people are now calling a complex trauma family or a complex trauma household. Um, they're, they're not hardwired, they're kind of soft-wired to react in those ways, because you've done it thousands and thousands of times as a kid. Uh, so as an adult, if somebody gives you that look, like your father used to give, before you're going to be punished, or for me, a lot of it is like abandonment, betrayal, or the biggest one of all for me is like, if I feel like somebody's treating me like my needs don't matter. Oh, man. That's just a button pusher for me, um, because I had to hold all that in as a child. I grew up as a child feeling constantly that my needs didn't matter, but I couldn't say anything, right? So I did the freeze, or I did the fawn, um, and I've learned and still do that. Well, hopefully not, but I've still done that in relationships as an adult. I just shut down. And then when I got to be old enough, um, then I could start doing a little bit more of fight, a little bit more of flight. Now I got to be 15 years old. Um, then I had all options on the table, and fighting back felt really good. Um, and so, and then when I was 19, I was out of there. Moved halfway across the United States to get away from it, thinking if I just get away from, and that was a necessary first step. I had to get away from that situation, but that didn't resolve the problem in full, because as I said, not only just the individual parents, but the entire family system was internalized, and I brought it all with me, completely unaware that I was doing that.
Rick, there's so much more I'd love to ask and to understand. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. You said you had a poem for us. If you
Yeah. So,
would love to hear that.
sure. This one is specifically about that mother wound that we talked about. And if I may, I'd like to just give you a quick little definition that I use for mother wound, and then I'll share
Sure.
the poem. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I got to get this up on my screen here. Um, a mother wound is the product of a significant disconnection or disruption in the relationship between mother and son. This can occur not only due to underengagement by the mother with her son, but also overengagement. The fundamental problem is that the son has significant needs that are not being seen and met by his mother over a long period of time. This can happen whenever a mother prioritizes her own needs over the needs of her son. The most harmful scenario is when she uses her son as a resource to meet her own narcissistic needs. You guys want to make any comments before I go in the poem?
No, let's go straight in the poem, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get this set up here. Okay, here we go. This poem is called Mother Space, and it follows up on what I just read. Mother Space. She octopus of love. I can still feel your soft tentacles wrapped up tight around my heart and lungs, squeezing out blood and oxygen across the years and miles to soothe your timeless wounds. I am your baby boy hologram, created to give you purpose and make you feel worthwhile. I am your life preserver, born wide-eyed and innocent into your world of choppy seas and sinking ships. I am your personal relic, frozen in time and space, thawed and frozen as required to satisfy your needs. You taught me how to keep myself small, to be the best listener, to put my needs last, to sacrifice myself, to wait my turn forever, to be ashamed of myself, to swallow every tear. You taught me to defer to the feminine, to accept the blame, to hide my power, to keep quiet, to keep the peace. You taught me that a man should be harder on himself than he is on anyone else. You taught me that it's better to get sick than to speak up. You taught me how to listen to lies and how to be replaced when the next shiny star caught the wandering eyes of the one I adored. You are the Minotaur's mate in the center of the maze. Your words and your actions live in parallel universes. Your skin reflects my every weakness back at me. You caress me with one hand and hold my head underwater with the other. You come for me time after time in various ways and various forms. Every woman who enters my life is you, or becomes you, a young girl who doesn't know better, or an old woman who doesn't want to. You can't see me, and you don't know me, but you won't admit it, and you won't let me go. Would it kill you to set me free? Would it kill you if I free myself?
It's beautiful. Thank you. Rick, just to finish off, first of all, thanks for being our guest. Thank you for the beautiful full poem as well. If people want to find out more about you, where do they go? What's the easiest to get in touch with you?
Well, two websites mostly. I have my kind of master website, which is rickbelden.com. If people are specifically interested in coaching, they can look for me at rickbeldencoaching.com. And I do offer a free 30-minute discovery session, kind of a get to know each other, to find out if we'd make a good match and if I'm a good source of help. I guess the last place I'd say is, you can find me on YouTube. That's where all my videos and different interviews and various podcasts and things like that are available.
Brilliant. No, thank you so
Brilliant.
much.
Thanks very much, Rick. And we'll obviously put all those links in the show
Yeah.
notes as well.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I like talking about this stuff, and the more conversations that we can generate along these lines, where, as I said, we get below the surface and get into some of the richness and some of the nuances, and there's a tremendous amount of potential here for men to grow and feel better and do better. And I guess if I have one frustration at this point in my life, is I don't think we're getting there fast enough.
Well,
Yeah.
we're chipping away. And well, thanks for all the work that you've done in blazing the trail.
All right, you're very welcome.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Feel free to reach out to Volker or David via our website, www.manupdown.com, or podcast@manupdown.com, with any feedback or to let us know what topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Hear you again soon.